Adventure Ho Illumineers, and welcome back to another episode of the DuckTale Dads. That's right, you do hear me. I am back. This is Nathaniel speaking. Back as always with Ryan and Mack for their episode. Good to see you both, fellas. Good to be back in studio tonight, recording. So, as always, let's kick it off roundtable with some what's new in your world. Plan to share since I get 2 weeks worth. Let's start with Ryan.
Well, thank you. Welcome back. Excited to have you back and hear all about your adventures in your week away. On a Lorcana front, just been kind of playing online and getting some reps in, trying out a couple of different deck lists, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast, what we're kind of seeing out there for options and opportunities. And that's been fun, just getting reps in Lorcana in a different way. I need some more live reps because obviously it's a different beast when you're checking your own triggers and making sure you're not missing anything and announcing your plays and things like that. But still fun to get the Lorcana in where we're able to. On a personal front, we got through another weekend. We had beautiful weather on Saturday here locally, so we got outside plenty of times. I got to get out and go get some dinner with some friends. My wife got to go to a baby shower for a friend, and so we got out. The kids got outside. We went for walks. We played outside. We had a picnic outside, really maximizing our time with our one day of nice weather that we had last week. And then it got cold again, so we came back inside and then we started playing and rearranging toys inside to keep it fresh and keep it new. And keep our sanity in that regard. Otherwise, nothing major, thankfully. No new illnesses to report on, and that's the ultimate ticket is staying healthy this time of year as we're transitioning into the springtime. Mack, what's new with you?
Well, unlike you, the sickness hit me this past weekend. However, today was the first day I woke up after like 6 days of just misery, where I was like, okay, I feel a lot better now. I'm about 90% of the way there, and then hopefully that means tomorrow morning I'm good to go, which is really important because this next weekend is when I leave for vacation. So I really don't want to deal with any sinus and congestion pressure, especially when I'm in a metal tube flying 30,000 feet in the air. That sounds not fun. And for my oldest son, it's his first plane, so I want to make sure I am well rested and ready to go before that happens, because that could get a little bit chaotic, but we're prepping ourselves for that. Other than that, this past weekend, my wife and I attended a wedding for a really good friend of ours. Had a blast doing that. Yeah, a nice night out away from the kids. The kids spent the night at the grandparents' house while we were there. And then with that, this week for me, Lorcana-wise, has been the week of like wheeling and dealing. As we're getting close to set champs, I've been trying to trade away cards that I no longer use and trying to build up the decks that I am interested in, as well as trying to purchase the singles route. I've held my ground and made sure that as I've started to see the market try and balance itself out, I felt like this was the time to start getting in on those things and being ready for set champs. So that's been me from a Lorcana perspective, is ensuring that I have the cards that I want to build the 2 or 3 decks that I'm interested in for the set champ season. So that's new in my world. Nathaniel, you got a couple weeks to catch us up on. What's going on?
Well, in the interest of keeping with the theme there, Mac, I was actually in one of those metal tubes, 30,000 feet in the air. I traveled for work last week to the desert, Las Vegas, so that was super fun. Lost track of all time and space and all those things because that place is very different than home in Minnesota, especially this time of year. I think I got off the plane and it was 75 degrees hotter than when I got onto the plane in Minnesota. So it's like that's just worlds apart, right? So that was fun. The other part from a personal perspective that was really great, I think there's these moments, right, where as a parent you have these mountaintop moments where something happens with your kid and it fills you with pride, and you just feel this overwhelming sense of this is one of those moments where you realize even more how great it is to be a parent. It's so gratifying. I had that this weekend when one of my 2 younger boys got on a pedal bike for the first time. And he's pretty young still, right? He's not even 4 yet. And so it was really cool to just see him get on that so early. And I just there's for those who are fans of the show The Office, during the episode where two of the characters get married, they do this thing like take like mental pictures, and they like have this kind of inside joke where they snap a picture, a fake picture, right? But it's like a mental image in your brain. And I was just like really trying to, again, for the second time in my life, having a kid ride a bike for the first time that is pedaling on the bike, right? Like they've all done like the balance bike thing, and we love those. But when you see them on a pedal bike for the first time, there's just something so special about that. And you kind of maybe remember back to when that was you 25 years ago or whatever that was. And it was amazing. And so that was actually yesterday, and today he was like chomping at the bit to get back outside and do it again. And it was just a great bonding experience for me, because he kind of needs me to kind of give him a little bit of a head start. But like once he's going, then he can go for a while. So it's just amazing. So from a personal perspective, it was great to kind of come back and experience something like that. That was really special with one of my kids when I was away from them for the better part of an entire week. So kind of a nice kind of pick you up, kind of get back into the swing of things as a parent when you took 5 days off from that duty because you were in a different state across country. So from a Lorcana perspective, I didn't get a chance to talk about this last week, so I'm probably have to do a little bit of a recap of myself. I know Lance did a great job of this last week, but not this very last weekend, but the weekend before, there was the Frosty 500 at Game Center here in Minnesota, and it went pretty well. And it was also very cool to see diversity there in terms of decks, in terms of the players. We got players from pretty far away that drove a few hours. Even some Wisconsin folks came in, so that was really cool. Yeah, so that was really fun. It was fun to kind of do that into my work trip. So the last 10 days have been kind to me. We'll call it that.
Yeah, Nathaniel, let's get into the Frosty 500. I'm curious to hear more about this and what your experience was there, and what decks you saw, and why you feel like it went pretty well, in your own words.
Yeah, so I think Lance had talked about this on the last episode, but there were 33 people there, so it was going to be a big group, and there were some very, very good players there. And I talked last set about how just run something purple, right? Like they're all good. And the deck that I did the worst with during like a decently successful stretch towards last set was Blurple. And I felt like it was in a good spot, and as much as everybody has been talking about dogs being the big bad in the room, and it's clearly the best deck, it's tier 0, maybe it deserves a ban, right? Everybody was like expecting it to be like everywhere, and so everybody teched for it. And so if you did run dogs, I think it like wasn't as successful, and there weren't really that many in the room anyways. So the cards that were maybe good into that were not that great into other decks. And so I can get into that a little bit more in a moment, but I had a couple cards here and there, and as you said, absolutely 100% net decked JDRR's public list to the T. I didn't sub a single card out. I basically just said, this is a pretty consistent looking list. He's a much better deck builder than me. I practiced with it a little bit, felt like I was comfortable with like what I was trying to do into what like different types of decks, and Blurple's just kind of busted. So let's just run it. And so in terms of like what I actually saw, so as I said, there were 33 people, and so the way this was going to come down to is you're going to have to play 6 rounds, and it was going to go to a top 8. And that's where some of the prizing would happen too. So, I wanted to just get into top 8 and get some of that portion of that prizing. Also, there was a huge snowstorm coming in, so I didn't know how much that would play into all this too. We can get on it in a second too. But I sat down, and my first opponent was actually running, and I think this is also another deviation, what I'm about to say here, in terms of like what you see at a local level versus like these big DLCs too, right? Is just like a really good amount of deck diversity in general. So you'll see that when I kind of talk through exactly what I saw. So the first round, I actually ran into a red-green list, and it was like a fun list. I don't know that it was the most competitive list ever. And so I think the game plan there was basically just like, hey, card advantage out this, like you're going to have card draw. They're probably not, unless they get up to a bunch of ink and they do Clarabelle things. And once this opponent stopped at like 5 ink, I knew that was not going to be a risk, and was able to basically just take away on that one. That one felt like a very straightforward one. And then the next round, let's see, I think I had this whole list here. I saw Ruby Amethyst. And I think, so that list it was kind of similar to what we saw last set, where it was like kind of intended to be a little bit faster of a list, like not straight aggro, but like a little bit more aggro-y, and it's still like drawn cards and stuff, but like it's got a lot of 2-questers. And I felt like if I could just keep up with them and not let the board state get too bad one way or another, I would be able to get over that list, and that is eventually is what happened against that one. So those are, I would say, the first 2 matchups were very positive for Blurple. Like that was probably one of the best decks to go into those 2 decks and do well, right? Especially on the draw. And so after that, the next thing I saw was Amber Sapphire. And this is where I think we start to see some of the meta shift in that is exciting about Winter Spell. I think yes, Dog still feels like amazing. Yes, purple decks, maybe they're a little bit of a problem, Mack, wink wink. But Amber Sapphire was crazy. Like the list I was playing against, he was drawing tons of cards with Surfer Stitches. I played into an Ohana Means Family and got absolutely crushed by that, where he drew like 5 cards off of swinging like a Surfer Stitch into a Demona. It was insane. And I'm like watching from across the table as my opponent has like a full grip of cards and he's playing blue and yellow cards, and I'm like, this is not right. I'm purple, not you. And he beats me the first game, and I'm like, no, like I need to go faster. Like I'm the more like aggressive deck here, right? Like I've got to go faster. And I felt like I was good on the play in terms of trying to do that. But game 3 was an absolute battle, and I barely squeaked it out, and I left that matchup feeling like, hey, like maybe there's not like a new sheriff in town, but there's definitely competitive decks out there that aren't just Dogs, Blurple, Purple Steel, like that people can run and have a good amount of success with. And he had some cool cards in there too, like what's that legendary card from last set that was Amber? It's the item that I think we were like, this
Cauldron?
is terrible. Yeah,
the Cauldron, yeah.
You can do some fun stuff with like replaying Hades out of that. So that's kind of a fun thing. It's not great into Blurple because Blurple is basically pushing that Hades into the Inkwell. But against other decks that are banishing those cards, it becomes a great way to like recur cards in a way. So that was really kind of a neat card that I saw. And this player wasn't actually running the Raging Storm, and I felt like if he had, I would have for sure lost, because there just wasn't going to be a good way for me to like battle the board state the way it was becoming and how much ink he had and how many cards he had. So I think if he had 2 of those in his deck, I'd probably just lose. So yeah, I felt like I was somewhat lucky to get out of that. It's relatively intact. And so I felt good, right? Blurple was the deck I did the worst with last set, and I was sitting there at 3-0, and I was like, oh my gosh, we could be maybe one more win, and we're looking at some draws and top 8. And I ran into Hannah, who we've had on the podcast before, and I quickly find out as we're playing that she is also running Sapphire and Amethyst. So I get to do the fun mirror thing. Lorcana mirrors are interesting, right? Like depending on the decks, sometimes it feels really bad, sometimes it just feels like, okay, they got to do the thing first, and that just makes the big difference. But I really had some good, I think, draws and the right strategy on the draw in game 1. So I was actually able to win game 1 on the draw. And then she won game 2 when she was on the play, and then game 3 I was able to win on the play. But there were certain cards that I noticed became really important that, like, and this is true in any matchup, right? Like for Lorcana, that like sometimes you just ink that card because it's going to be terrible in this matchup, and sometimes it's like one of the most important cards you could see. And, you know, I think as people have been teching towards Dogs, they've been removing things like Hypnotic Strength. They never come back, right? And so suddenly Yago is an amazing card in these purple mirrors, but especially like Blurple ones, because now you have the biggest evasive on the field that can crack into big things, and also they can't crack back into it if they don't have evasive. So that was interesting to see how important that card became in that matchup. And also just like who was drawing their like guidebooks and all that stuff too, right? So that was really interesting, but able to take that. So I was 4-0. So at this point I'm like, I made top 8, right? All I have to do is intentional draw. I got paired down into a 3-1 who was like very much incentivized to play out that matchup. And he was running Emerald Sapphire. So you are indeed hearing this correctly. This is round 5. I haven't seen a single like duplicate ink as far as like my opponents go. So that felt really cool. that at this point, like we're 5 rounds deep and I haven't like had a repeat opponent, and I only had one mirror at this point all day. And I think I was really fortunate in this case to run into this at this stage because our friend Connor is a great Emerald Sapphire player. I have play tested that list a lot, and I have a pretty good idea about like what I should do as the Blurple player into that list. And I think it really served me well because I think you can just get like mega punished if you don't into that type of deck where you just like you play into their Clarabelle, they draw 6 cards, and you just like lose basically in that moment almost, it feels like. So I was able to win that one. And I was 5-0, and at that point I was guaranteed top 8, and there was a giant blizzard, so it was like, I don't know how much longer we're going to be here. And so after the next round, I was able to ID on that last round, and then we just decided I was the 1 seed, which that was cool. And we decided to just split the top 8 prizing so everybody could go home, including the judging staff, which Ellie O is our resident judge. She was amazing. She's such an asset to have in our community, and it's really great to see her judging these larger events.
She's
so
really
huge
incredible.
Thanks to her.
Yeah, and she's
like
so
huge
passionate about judging, and it's really, really cool to see her operate and control and keep an event flowing like seamlessly. It seems like everything is so effortless, and that's kind of the hallmark of a great judge is making the entire event feel just completely effortless. So great, awesome that she was involved and was able to help run and organize things. And it's really I always value being able to interact with her.
Yeah, and I also learned something too from this weekend, or that weekend is like from Ellie, that if the top 8, if there seems to be a desire to just split whatever the prizing is like across those players, there's like an official way to do this. So they give everybody a card, 2 cards, and they're face down. You do this independently, and it's all funned out, and it's brawl, and you hand one of those cards back to the judge. If any of the top 8 people choose brawl, you play out the top 8. If every single person chooses all funned out, then you can just like split the top 8. So it's kind of a way to like not just like pressure people through peer pressure into like, oh, let's just split, right? That's the right thing to do. And like everybody gets to make their own choice, and you have to like respect that choice. So if one person does want to play it out, they don't ever have to reveal who they were. But if one person says yes, then you go. I think fortunately for us, from like a safety perspective, it was kind of nice because I did start slipping around on my way home. So I was very happy that I was able to get back relatively unscathed. Yeah, not relatively, completely unscathed. But I was glad that ultimately ended up happening. And huge shouts to AJ as well for helping organize this Frosty 500. He's our TO for the anniversary events here in Minnesota. So he put on the 1 year and the 2 year anniversary event. He's amazing. And so, great to like have him do that, but also like he could then get home. And then I think even the store was discussing whether they were even going to wrap up early because we did get a foot of snow. So it was kind of nice to not have to be like, oh, here's my 3-hour drive home now battling through a blizzard. So, yeah, all in all, like felt great. Blurple felt super strong. And I felt like a little bit of redemption maybe on my end of like, hey, I can play good purple decks and do kind of well with them. So yeah, felt cool.
That's awesome. I'm glad you had that experience. I know Ryan and I were hoping to make it too, but it just didn't work out in our schedules. I know Ryan being sick and me doing a lot more home chores, right, with everything going on in my house. I'm glad one of the DuckTale Dads made it out for sure. And I'm glad you had some success there. And I don't really know if you would call it redemption with the fact that you still won a lot last set. Blurple is just so good. But we'll go with that word if that makes you feel a little bit better about how it went. One question I had in follow-up with that event is, last week's episode, we talked a lot about ink identities and kind of how the ink identities may have shifted, and we gave our 2 cents about it, and maybe applying what you went through with your own experience at the Frosty 500 and or what you kind of thoughts that you might have come up with during last week's episode. Is there anything we missed, or is there anything maybe you want to reiterate and highlight, like, yeah, that's a really good point about this ink? What are your thoughts on kind of the ink identities before we move on to the next aspect of this show?
Before I answer that question, I did also want to say there was one more person that I saw at the event that made me very happy, and that was Mack. He did make an appearance. He didn't get a play in the Frosty 500, but he did show up. It was a nice boost for me as the golden retriever. Maybe that helped me carry the day. Mack, just getting to see you in person. So thanks for popping out.
I'll take it.
It was great. So yeah, I did listen to last week's episode, and I think you guys made a lot of great points. One thing I do think, and this has happened both in conjunction with some of the testing I've been doing lately, but also what I've experienced here, particularly against this Amber Sapphire deck, is Amber as an ink color right now. Like, you guys did touch on this a little bit last week, I think, but like, it kind of feels like the do-it-all color right now, weirdly enough. And yes, there are like very specific cards that do that, but like the Horseman strikes as like this really good, great, not really good, great spot removal, draw a card. Like, that card is awesome. So suddenly Amber has some removal, right? But it's just a specific one. And then this set they got Raging Storm. So like now you get to do like the incremental, like banish a guy, but you also get to hold this like big like trump card back, like where eventually, you know, battling the board, well, you get to be the one to control the board wipe. So that feels like that list has like, or that ink color has now gotten that identity a little bit, but they're also getting a weird amount of card draw. And that's where I think I, like, as I touched on, right, like I did play into like an Ohana Means Family and kind of got like uber punished for that, right? But like, even without that card, like, yes, that is a card new to this set, but like, even without that card, you have the Snowboarder Stitch, which is a great card, especially when you have a color like Amber Sapphire who's able to play that pretty early, right? Like turn 4, this 4/5 comes down, like that's really good. So he's probably going to quest for 2 and draw you a card. They have Surfer Stitch, which has been around since, you know, chapter 1, right? That is starting to see some play. So like all of a sudden, it feels like Amber has this identity of like, yes, it has some like removal things, but like it also has like some really, really good card draw in it. And like, I think that is going to start showing itself more in more decks, like doing well, I think, as we approach set champ season. So like, I could see a world where like Amber Sapphire does really well at a set champs, or even one of the ink colors that I really like being Amber Amethyst. I just think like, it's just funny, right? Because usually when you think of a deck or the ink identity of like card draw, it is Amethyst, right? But all of a sudden, if you have Amber and Amethyst together, it's just like you have 55 cards that like draw more cards, maybe. I don't know. But I think that Amber right now, it's almost like can do a little bit of each of the things more than it ever has in my view. And I think that's in some ways cool because it feels like they are kind of experimenting a little bit with that. Whereas I think historically the ink color, and Ryan words this very well, I think, Emerald being like the parasite color, right? Where it like gets to kind of like feed off of what other decks do well, right? Like it feeds off of the ramp of the blue decks, or it feeds off of the card draw from the purple decks, Amethyst decks. So like, I think in some ways, like Amber's making its own identity, but it's like a little bit different, and it's a little bit of like multiple things versus just like the straightforward in some ways of like historically Sapphire equals ramp, Amethyst equals card draw. So I think that's in some ways that's like interesting, and I think that will definitely play out, especially as we get into like rotation. Another great card that I think Ernie might have talked about 2 episodes ago is that Ariel card. When you play a song, you can, I think, if you boost her, you get to draw a card. So I mean, there's just like there's more interesting ways to draw cards, and I think what we came out of rotation with was like that was damaged in some way, right? Because like some decks like really relied on a couple cards that got rotated out in order to be viable, because that was how they drew cards. Now some of those things are coming back, so maybe I'm overreacting a little bit, but Amber feels really good, fellas. Like, I think historically considered kind of a weaker color, and right now, of course, it's part of dogs, but like it feels like it's viable, and like you can stretch it, which is really cool.
I've been seeing a lot of like an Amber Steel list that gets a singer out and then sings a Cood and gets a 5 cost on turn 3, and so you drop to your point, that Surfer Stitch coming out on turn 4. Surfer Stitch on turn 3, also a very scary proposition. The 5 willpower is nothing to shake a stick at, because there's no clean way to remove that on turn 3 or turn 4. You can't even like sing a Thunderbolt to get rid of it unless you can't even, like, I don't know. There's just no way to get rid of it. that quickly. So it does a very good job of like pressuring the board in that sense, and you get to fill in behind that. So that Amber Steel list, I think that you were referencing with that aerial also leverages that aerial. What is a 4-cost inkable 3/4 quest for 2, boost for 1. If there's a card underneath her, once per turn you may draw a card when you sing a song. So it's just like turning a Adamudi into draw 2. You sing a Thunderbolt, you draw a card, you deal 4 damage to something. Like that's just an extra added bonus to make your songs even that much more ink-efficient, as if songs weren't ink-efficient enough as already. And so I think, yeah, to your point, Amber has a lot of tools now, and people are the community is starting to figure out how to leverage these tools. And I think it'll be a learning curve for the rest of the community to catch up on, is how to not play into Ohana Means Family again. Like, avoid the Rapunzel traps, everybody. Remember that is a card that they can play. If they have a giant willpower character and you have a giant strength character in your field, maybe heavily consider questing before doing so, to avoid you walking into these Ohana traps, as we will likely refer to them for the next 6 sets, as everyone collectively gets used to playing against Ohana Means Family, because it's a very strong card. If you play a 3-cost inkable action that draws you 3 or 4 cards, that's efficient at rate, right? Because the unconditional draw in Amethyst is 3 ink for 2 cards. So if you can do even slightly better than that, then that is an ink-efficient card. If you have a Surfer Stitch out and your opponent for some reason turns a Mal Dragon sideways in front of you, and you're drawing 7 off of that Surfer Stitch and that Ohana Means Family, then that's likely to be game over. I don't know how you overcome that, because that's just so many resources. So I'm interested to see how that goes as the community gets more and more used to playing against Ohana Means Family. But I think definitely for this set, that is a very viable card that is going to do very well for a lot of players that end up playing it at set championships or other events, because I think the community is just it's a relearning curve, right? The community needs to get used to this being a possibility of playing into.
Yeah, and with our Amber conversation, kind of pointing back to last week, right? I think Lance made a really good point, or made the point rather, that like prior to really this set, or even maybe rotation to a greater extent, like he never played Amber, and I was kind of the same way. And now with a lot of these newer cards in Amber, it's been fun to test out a new ink color for at least me personally. That's something that I've tried and am enjoying quite a bit. I think the point overall that we're making here, at least what I'm gathering from you guys, is whereas Amethyst is just the traditional like play a card, draw a card, kind of the almost instant card draw aspects of that color. What I have found that's been really fun with Amber is that conditional card draw, and I think that's what the community has wanted, at least spread out amongst the other 5 colors that isn't Amethyst. We all know that Amethyst is the card draw color. That's how it was designed before the game was even released, right? Like when Ravensburger released like what these identities are going to be. And I get that totally, but I think what the conversation from the greater community has been is, then that makes sense, but then how do other colors draw cards in a more conditional way? And with Amber, that has always been, if you heal a couple characters, you draw cards based on that healing. Or the main identity for Amber has always been let's just spit out as many characters as possible. And your conditional card draw is you benefit by playing Surfer Stitch, right? Because you have so many characters on board, you play another character, and because you have so many of those on board, then you get to draw cards as a result of that. And I think that conditional card draw aspect is in Amber, at least for me personally, has been a reason why I've play tested a lot of this ink color. Now, I think Ravensburger's test is to see how that can now spread to other colors. Previously, Sapphire, right, with Hiram, it was you're drawing with items. That obviously no longer exists, not only with just the Hiram ban, but the biggest item was Popsicle, and then slightly behind that was Maurice's Workshop. Those have been rotated out. And then Emerald, the Parasite, right? That's Clarabelle, right? How do you figure that out? How do you play around that? Or your welcomes for Clarabelle, things of that nature. Ruby has always been the main struggle, right? Steel has kind of had this discard your hand to then draw cards effect. So like there's more conditions here within the other ink colors, I think, besides Ruby, right? And I'm not going to get into that conversation again, but I've enjoyed that with Amber. Ever since Rapunzel's been rotated out, it's like, what is their conditional card draw that isn't just Surfer Stitch that was reprinted? And now I think we have that, and that feels good. There are options there for Amber, and that's been fun to test it out. So I'm excited and I'm happy with this Amber trend, and I'm glad you provided your insight on that, Nathaniel. Unless you had anything else that you wanted to point out from an ink identity perspective, then we can move on to the next topic. But I think you did, so go for it.
Yeah, my parting note too, I think, is just like seeing some of this stuff, right? Like seeing Ohana like be used and like to have some success with it, and Ryan saying like you have to watch out for the like Ohana trap. It reminds me of just how good of a card Rapunzel truly was. Like the reason why it was a high value card for so long too, right, is like Ohana is a good card because you could draw anywhere between 1 and 7 cards, maybe, if you're really lucky. Like Rapunzel consistently getting 2 to 3 and sticking a body on that turn is like crazy. So I can see why like that was a card that like it did make sense to rotate that out. I think it's very fitting to talk about Rapunzel right now because she's probably making a comeback pretty soon here, because people will be shifting into preparation for the Indianapolis DLC, being that that is indeed Infinity. And you will have to be watching out for Rapunzel traps, right? But I think it kind of shows me, because I think there was mixed expectations around that card, Ohana Means Family, of like, oh, yes, you get to draw cards, but you're like, are you kind of taking a turn off and not playing a character? What does that mean for you? But like seeing people finding like great ways to make it work, and the fact that people don't always expect it because it hasn't been played that much yet, that card's pretty good, y'all. So I think, yeah, that's my last parting note, is like, we have to, the conditional card draw thing, I think, Mack, you nailed it. It's interesting to see that start to recover now, as we're on the doorstep of another rotation.
Yeah, that's crazy too. Something to start thinking about with only one more set to go until we got to start thinking about rotation again. But as we've kind of like highlighted through this beginning conversation here, we've started to get into some trends that we've noticed, especially as we're coming towards the later stages of the winter spell meta. And we wanted to share what that meta shift is starting to feel like. So I'm going to pass it off to Ryan first. Ryan, what's a trend that you've noticed maybe over the last week or so, and not initial release on winter spell, but are there any shifts that you're starting to see, and what are they?
Yeah, so a lot of what I'm seeing just through playing online as people are testing out new decks and trying different combinations and really trying to get a hang of things, is a lot of Amber and a lot of Amber experimentation. So Ruby Amber being one of those that is really kind of like taking off and causing me headaches and problems. I feel like it has a very good matchup into dogs, into like Emerald Amethyst, like both the aggressive version of dogs and like kind of the more control version of dogs. And a lot of that's coming from this alternative card draw or conditional card draw through Webby's Diary, which is a 3-cost inkable item that I forget if there's an on-play effect, but there is another effect that if whenever you boost a character, you may pay 1 ink and draw a card during your turn. So there's this like constant opportunity for card draw when they play low-cost boost characters. So this Amber Ruby deck is playing like a 2-cost uninkable Scrooge that starts as a 3/3 and it gets +1 strength and +1 willpower for every card underneath it. So it boosts for 1. So effectively you're paying 2 ink to draw a single card each turn, but you get to draw an additional card, and it's just like incremental gain value as you're increasing your stats on this character, and you're drawing a card from it through Webby's Diary. Also playing the 3-cost inkable 4/4 Aladdin with Reckless. That has the boost 1 effect as well, where if there's a card underneath Aladdin, then your characters with Reckless may exert to gain a lore, which is effectively questing, but not truly questing. So it's more of just it's an exert effect, so it gets around things like Reckless being casted upon it, or things where you cannot quest for the turn, those type of effects. But again, it's just this boost 1, pay another ink and draw a card, and just like constant card advantage mechanism in this Amber Ruby deck, that then you get to these really big ink totals because you have so many cards in your hand that you don't really care if you're inking a card every turn because you're drawing 2, and so you're effectively at card parity every turn if you're playing one to the board. And so that Amber Ruby list, I think, is one that's been like I've seen more frequently in online testing, and it seems to have very strong play lines and very strong opportunities to succeed. Where if you can't get that Webby's Diary under control, or you can't control the board, you can't keep those boost characters off the board for long enough, then all of a sudden they're at like 8 or 9 ink, and now they're playing out Black Cauldron and tucking cards underneath it to recycle through the game as well. They're playing Maleficent Monstrous Dragon, some Raging Storms even, just to, if the board gets out of control in the opponent's favor. And so just playing this very, very strong and cohesive deck list. And I think Lucas Kalpa brought it to DLC Ghent and had a lot of success with it there. And so I think that's where kind of the initiative for this Amber Ruby deck kind of took off. There's probably a contingent that was playtesting it prior to that because they saw the same power that the Lucas Kalpa saw in it, but then him bringing it to a DLC level and DLC scale and playing it on stream a couple of times, I think really brought it to a greater community. And so now there's a lot more people just testing it out and seeing how it goes, because it does have a very good matchup into dogs. It does have a very good matchup into purple decks too, because it plays the Horseman Strikes. It has the Raging Storms. It can play like big amber characters like Nakoma and Bagheera that are just really big statted characters that can really control the board well. And then it has the Ruby removal, the spot removal that is strength based. So it's playing the Headless Horseman. I don't think I've seen this yet, but you could even fit a couple of Grab Your Bows in if you're really worried about these like really low strength aggressive lists. So Ruby Amber is one of those that I've been seeing, and just in general seeing a lot of like experimentation, which is always fun to see when people are trying out new decks and testing new things. Just seeing the interactions and how they fit with the deck that you're playing. Seeing like, hey, I might want to try that in this deck. It's one of the same colors that I'm playing, so let's slot it in there and see how it feels. Or man, I'm seeing a lot of these items, a lot of 3-cost items out there just to dodge like Tigger interactions. Have just been like destroying games against me with like an Amber Amethyst list that has no item interaction really available to it, unless you play like Be Gone, which still feels bad because you're just returning it to hand, so they play it the next turn anyways. At the same time, like those 3-cost items have just been really running amok and causing a lot of trouble. Snow Fort in Emerald decks, beefing up your characters, it's just really annoying, makes combat math really awkward to play against it. If they get 2 Snow Forts out, then it's really like, can I race this deck? Because that's my only opportunity. If I'm already behind and I can't race them, then I'm not going to control the board because they have +2 strength and +2 resist on my turn, so I can't really swing into anything because nothing's strong enough to do that. The Black Cauldron I mentioned to constantly recycle things for both Amber Ruby, also Amber Sapphire playing the Black Cauldron to recycle Hades that get banished and just constantly keep pushing your cards into the Inkwell on a regular basis. Those, like the Amber Ruby deck, that's the other thing I forgot to mention. The Amber Ruby deck playing Wreck-It Ralph and the Lonely Grave combination for an instant board wipe, and then dropping a Black Cauldron and recycling the Wreck-It Ralph through the Black Cauldron so you can constantly have access to this board wipe. A lot of scary combinations out there as the games get longer and longer. And so those Amber decks, I think, have a major leg up in having a lot of tools to leverage these long matchups now. So it really is becoming a very strong control deck. And I think with rotation, I think that happens in June or July of this year, if I'm not mistaken. The next rotation does. I think Amber will be like... Emerald Sapphire seems like this. I want to grind out every other deck list and then win when I have like 12 cards left in my deck after a 40-minute game. That's what I feel like Emerald Sapphire currently is filling the role of. Amber Sapphire kind of slotting in there a little bit with this like full board wipe opportunity. And I think after rotation, once things get rotated out, I think Amber Sapphire becomes kind of the premier option for being that biggest, ugliest control deck that's going to get bigger and uglier than every other control deck out there and just grind out the games that way. And I think that's what we'll see in the future in terms of shifting the meta around. And for this set specifically, I think we're going to see a wide array of ink colors doing well. I think we're back to that like sweet spot meta that we were in for set 7 and set 8 pre-rotation, where a lot of decks have a lot of options and a lot of firepower available to them to be able to find success on any given day.
I had one follow-up for you, Ryan, and I know you touched on this, but maybe if you could explain it in depth a little bit. The one thing about this Ruby Amber deck, they play a lot of bigger characters. How are they getting ink in their inkwell? Can you maybe go over what you've noticed that they have been using to do that?
Yeah, so just leveraging card draw in order to have plenty of cards in hand to be able to ink things that you just finding ink basically turn after turn after turn. So an early Webby's Diary on turn 4 probably, so you can 4 or 5, whatever, 3, so you can boost on turn 4 to start drawing extra cards. But an early Webby's Diary with these boost characters out is really powerful in generating the card draw you need just to find ink. Kind of in the same way that Emerald Sapphire leverages the 4-cost inkable Donald Duck, Perfect Gentleman. That's a 2/5 quest for 2, but it doesn't ever turn sideways because it just sits there and draws an extra card for Emerald Sapphire every turn. They leverage it in 2 ways that Emerald Sapphire deck does, by both filling your opponent's hand for even greater Clarabelle value later, but also then just churning through an extra card every turn just to find an inkable card. So you can hold on to your combo pieces, ink cards that you aren't part of the combo or duplicate parts of your combo pieces, so that you can continue your game plan going forward. That's kind of the same line of thinking that Amber Ruby is taking it that I've seen. They get a Webby's Diary out. They have this boostable character. They boost it, draw an extra card with Webby's Diary. Now you've drawn 2 cards for the turn, so you can ink a card, play a card, and you still have card parity in your hand for the turn because you've drawn the extra card that turn. They also have the Amber Aerial. It's a 4-cost inkable 3/4 quest for 2 that if a card is underneath the Aerial, once per turn, if you play a song, you may draw an extra card. So then they play cards like Delamoon's Lullaby, so you can sing with your 2-cost character, draw an extra card there from the Aerial, boost the Aerial, so you're getting the Webby's Diary trigger for another card draw that turn. So sometimes they're drawing 3 or 4 cards in a turn just by boosting the Aerial and playing a Della's Moon Lullaby. They've drawn 3 cards by triggering the Webby's Diary then. Della's Moon, Webby's, and Aerial. Yep, 3 cards. So the way they get enough ink in their inkwell to play these giant characters is to stall the game out with these big statted characters early in the game, so you feel awkward turning sideways, or they get to clear your board if you do, and then boosting and drawing the extra card every turn in order to have enough cards in their hand to be able to ink and maintain card parity without running out of cards in hand, is kind of how they get to those high ink costs. And then I think they also depend on the abundance of Sapphire decks in the meta, specifically Amethyst Sapphire or Blurple, where they're pushing any characters into the inkwell through the removal tools like Into the Unknown, Let It Go, and Hades. That just kind of pushes more cards into the inkwell for them to be able to play these high cost characters as well. But the major way that they're finding ink on a consistent basis is just through excessive card draw. So if you're able to turn off those card draw engines, then you kind of have a chance of grinding them out. But if you're not able to, then they kind of run away with it because they're just constantly drawing more cards than you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I especially noticing how popular Sapphire has been becoming too. And sure, you're spot removing, but that's kind of the double-edged sword, right, with Sapphire, is that you're also ramping your opponent, and kind of how great of a risk are you willing to take when it comes to something like that. This is something that's I didn't think of in our pre-list here, but you kept harping on it throughout your conversation here. That's the items, and there's a lot of sneaky good items now that have been popping up, and ironically, like you mentioned, they're all 3-cost, which is kind of funny. I didn't really realize that until you said it, but item removal seems like it might not be like happening now, but I've started thinking about it the last 2 or 3 days. Like, sure, we were all familiar with Emerald Chromacon and getting rid of cards like that, but there are a lot of these other things now that are popping up that are making item removal really important. So something to consider for me personally, but for listeners and for us, right? It's like, okay, we got to take serious consideration about item removal, because these are seemingly at face value not very important, but as we've started to see things, very high impact items that you need to be able to take care of. Otherwise, these single items can take over the game for your opponent. So something to keep in mind. So I'm glad you pointed that out, and it's got my head spinning a little bit now on how I tech my deck accordingly to make sure that I deal with these pesky little items, right? Nathaniel, what about you?
Yeah, I think so. A couple things Ryan just said that I really like, specifically about the Ruby Amber thing, in the sense that like this is in some ways when I feel like Lorcana starts to become like at its best, where an ink combination that has historically been not very good is not only finding ways to be competitive, and good players are bringing it to like huge tournaments, but like it's using some of the fun, like newer mechanics of the game to be relevant, right? So like as decks are evolving and as the game is evolving, the ways in which decks are performing well is also evolving, right? It's not just like, oh, I'm just going to outdraw you and just because of that I can win, right? Like how maybe Ruby Amethyst historically would win, right? Like I'll outcard advantage you and I'll board wipe, right? Like if that's just always how that deck wins for 5-6 years, right? Like is that really all that fun, right? Like finding different ways to like have decks change and become viable in different ways, I think is exciting. And specifically like using an item in conjunction with the boost mechanic, I think to become this like scary duo, I think that is amazing. And yeah, like to Ryan's point, like there's all these like interesting synergies like with it, right? Like the gravestone with Ralph and then using the cauldron to like recur. Like these are all newer cards and they're like cycling and finding like really cool creative ways that like if you like have good practice on this, like all of a sudden you've got this really scary deck. And I think that's when Lorcana can just be so exciting and so fun. I also like that Ryan gave a shout out to my guy Tigger. That card rocks. I love him. This is the 4-cost inkable 4/3. When you play it, you can bounce any 2-cost or less card, item, or character. It can be good for bouncing your own stuff, bouncing their stuff, bouncing locations. It's just an amazing card. And that's also a newer card. But that's neither here nor there. We're talking about Ruby Amber. But yeah, I think, I don't want to belabor the point, but seeing that deck, like we talked about that deck early on, like in this set, and we were like salivating over like the Ruben and cheat out Mulan Archer, right? Like early. And like, look how different this is than like that playline. Like, yeah, that could certainly exist in some decks, but like this is relying on something totally different to be this like scary, don't turn sideways or I'm going to punish you, but also the clock is ticking and I'm about to like reach a board wipe in a couple turns. So it's probably ticking anyways, right? Like that's scary. So I think seeing this become viable is so cool, and it does totally have shades of Arcasia and Reina Jafar, where it's like all of a sudden deck combinations are like relevant that historically weren't, and there's more than just 3 maybe.
Well, I talked about my trend. I think, Nathaniel, is there a trend that you've noticed in the meta over, I know you haven't played really in a week, but you've played the most in the community, more so compared to me and Ryan. So what are your thoughts over the overall maybe shifts in the meta?
I think people are finding ways, and this kind of builds off of the Ruby Amber conversation. I think people are finding ways to make Ruby viable again. One of the top 8's deck lists that was just like a really fun, and he's a really creative player, his name's Micah. He had this Ruby Emerald list where he always wanted to go second. Which is really weird in Lorcana, right? Like it's like assumed when you win the dice roll that like you're gonna say I'm on the play in game 1, right? And it was interesting. His deck was like built to go second. Like he had some of the underdog, like the one that you love,
Liquidator.
Guy. Yeah, Liquidator. Like he wanted to go second because the extra card did mean something to him, and also he had underdog characters that he could play out on turn 1 that like he's getting out early because of that. So that was really interesting, but I think it also just shows that like Ruby, yes, it was pretty bad for like 3, the better part of 3 sets, but like it's starting to find its way now, and I think that's really cool, where it's not just like, oh, it's Ruby Amethyst or bust, and only then for like maybe like a window of set 10 or whatever, right? Like making it work in Ruby Amber, even showing some success in this cool Ruby Emerald list. And I think that matters too, right? And some cards are being printed that will be viable after this next rotation, right? Like Marching Off to Battle. You guys mentioned Grab Your Bow. Like there's going to be viable cards in Ruby. I think it's going to depend on them introducing more to that card pool to make it sustainable. But like, maybe we see Ruby Sapphire start to finally make a comeback. But my point, I think, is is that I think Ruby is making a slight comeback and finding its footing more than maybe we thought towards the beginning of this set. And I think that's a really good thing. And it also just contributes to more of this ink parity or ink distribution, where we're seeing more decks perform well and more ink color combinations perform well. It's not just like I like to do, play something purple.
That's a good point. The last topic that I had personally, before you guys can get to whatever you had, is control decks. Ernie highlighted it on the episode that he joined us a couple weeks ago, but the fact that he wanted to make sure that it was well known that when a set is first released, we see a lot of these aggressive decks kind of dominate right away, because the control decks are just harder to process, and that's what they're designed to do, right? And then once the aggro decks are figured out, we see the mid-range start to cycle in. And then once the mid-range are figured out, that's when the control decks start to find its footing within the meta. And I think this week especially, at least in my own personal play testing, I've seen a lot more people playing control decks because they've started to figure out answers to these mid-range and aggro deck lists that have become really popular, at least for the first half of Winter Spell. We highlighted the Amber Sapphire before. I know Sapphire Steel is very much considered mid-range control that I think is starting to find its footing as well. At least I've seen a lot more people play testing that. Obviously, Ed Chu just won a DLC with Emerald Sapphire. That still exists. Still a very strong deck. I mean, it's won a couple DLCs in the last two sets. So it's a very strong control deck right now. And then to your point about this last conversation, Ruby Amber, like this is a control deck. It's kind of weather the storm and be able to play the big characters out, which is all that control wants to do. I got bigger characters than you. Try and answer me back. And so that's something that I've noticed over the course of the last week of play testing is the control decks are starting to find their footing in the meta. And I think that great holy trinity of Lorcana is truly starting to find itself within Winter Spell. And I'm excited because that just means more variety, and that's what I'm all about. So have you guys seen the same thing, or is there something else you want to add to this point?
Yeah, I think as I touched on, one of the things I had noticed in that Frosty 500 is there was definitely some tech cards that people were expecting dogs. But then what ultimately ended up happening when a lot of these mid-rangier control decks, I'm saying like mid-range blurples, kind of like, I don't know, swings, maybe like a bigger like mid-range deck, I don't know, but like the cards that ended up mattering were like I'm gonna get bigger than you, right? And I think this is, to your point, Mac, like the adjustment that like starts to kind of ebb and flow is like if aggro's doing really well, then we're seeing cards that kind of like handle aggro more get put into these decks, and as there's like more variety, then you kind of say, okay, well, I want to make my deck like the best it can be in like a more diverse field, which means maybe getting bigger or having options to get bigger than the other mid-range or other control decks if that's what I need to do. So I think it like is certainly impacting like your style starts to show even more, I think, even within your ink color choice now, right? Like if you're like more of like a mid-range blurple player, maybe you do kind of keep it to like churning out like a little bit more characters, a little bit less of the like, hard card advantage cards, like, second star to the right, for example. I think that's what's going to be interesting too, is like even within a single ink combination, we might start to see people's play styles come out more versus like, well, this is clearly the best, 60 card list in that ink combo. And I think that's a really good thing too for the game.
Mac, I think we're all, if nothing else, variety people, maintaining diverse interests, home repair, battling sickness, traveling to Las Vegas. So it's nice to see that the variety is coming back into Lorcana, and we're getting to this sweet spot. The trinity you were referencing, for those that are not aware, is aggro, control, and mid-range decks. So aggro beats control decks, mid-range beats aggro decks, control beats mid-range decks, and then control just gets to beat everything once they figure out what they need to control. And so I think that's where we're getting to, and I think that's probably why Mac likes this game so much, is because the control deck does get to control everything once they figure out what they need to do to control everything. And I think to Ernie's point that you mentioned, Mack, was aggro decks do very well at the beginning, and then mid-range decks conquer the aggro decks, and then control decks conquer the mid-range decks. I think aggro decks just, have the strongest linear game plan at the beginning of sets. Like, hey, this is a cool new card that gives me a lot of lore and provides this like incremental advantage early in the game. Let's just play a bunch of that. And then people are like, the control decks have to effectively guess at what those aggro decks the aggressive decks are going to be doing, and trying to figure out like, what do I need to control? So if you whiff on that guess of what you need to control, now you have dead cards in your list for an event, and that feels really bad, especially if they're uninkable. So if you play Grab Your Bow, but nobody's playing any 1 or 2 strength characters and everything's 3 strength or higher, well, now you have uninkable dead cards that you're never going to be able to use unless you have some sort of like strength augmentation. Like Rhinos or Delos Moon Lullaby or Sapphire Coils or whatever it is that you want to be playing for that. And so I do appreciate that the set is long enough for us to be able to get to that level where the control decks can figure out what they need to control. Looking into the future a little bit, one of the interesting things that I'm looking at is Wilds Unknown, I think, is like somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks between release and set championships. Which is a very short amount of time for a meta to develop. And I'm assuming Ravensburger is also assuming that there's not going to be enough variation in deck building because it's the end of the rotation set for there to be for this 1 month time frame to make a huge impact on the metagame. I do expect that there will be plenty of playtesting because NA and EU championships are going to be on Wilds Unknown meta, I believe, and maybe they're going to squeeze in set 13, but I'm pretty sure Worlds is set 13 for sure. And so I think they're trying to usher this along so they can get to the rotation before, set 13 hits, and then they can just do 9 through 13 for season 2 finale of the events. But that time frame, I think, we're going to see a lot of the same decks being played for set 12 championships, for Wilds Unknown set championships, as we're going to see for Winterspell set championships, and it's going to be these Amber Sapphires, Amber Rubies, Emerald Sapphires, Amethyst Sapphire, Amethyst Steel, Amber Steel. I think there's going to be a broad range of decks being played. I just don't think we're going to have a solved meta by the time set championships rolled around because of that short time frame. And I'm here for it, man. I'm excited to see the chaos that ensues as a result of players having 4 to 6 weeks to craft and create their favorite decks to bring to set championships on such a short time frame.
Yeah, I think from how our deck's going to change, I think you nailed it, Ryan. I do believe that, if I remember correctly, set 8 was the set where it felt like some lists didn't change at all, or they maybe would put 2 to 6 total cards into the deck, which means it's changing 10% or less of your 60-ish card deck. So I do think that that's, to your point, that had to have played some sort of a factor in the very aggressive timeline. And so I think we will have to see how that plays out. But I'm now that you've said that, in my brain, my head's kind of spinning oh my gosh, we're going to finish set champs. And then I got to talk to my wife 2 weeks later and be like, hey, set champs are coming up. And she's going to be like, how does that work? So super fun. Going to look forward to that. But while that set, though, is, I think, going to be super, super fun, I think everybody is definitely chomping at the bit for Toy Story. And I think even before that, I am certainly, or sorry, not just Toy Story, it's Pixar, right? It's multiple franchises that are coming to Lorcana, so that's going to be amazing. But speaking of being excited for something, we do also have an exciting guest coming up, fellas, in just a couple weeks. So the DuckTale Dads, as you guys got to celebrate last week without me, have now been a channel, a trio that is out there in the world for officially a year. To celebrate that, we are going to bring someone on that we fortunately have met in person, that is fairly well known in the Lorcana community, and maybe we just leave it at that.
I just want to say this person is a very prominent voice in the Lorcana community. People will recognize this person if you follow just the scene in general from a broad perspective. So We feel very fortunate that this person has agreed to join us for an episode. Super stoked about this. Talking about it now, literally have goosebumps right on my arm. So it's going to be awesome. Very grateful that this person's going to dedicate some time to us. It's coming up in a couple weeks. We're trying to nail down the final recording date, but just something for our audience to be aware of, that we're very excited to have a very known figure in the community join us shortly, just beyond the horizon. Very much a pun intended.
All right. Well, fellas, it has been great to be back. Definitely good when we have all three of us on these discussions. So again, for my part, I am so thrilled to have spent the last year with both of you, talking Lorcana pretty much every day, it feels like, especially on these dedicated timeframes with our episodes. Just super grateful. So looking forward to the next year as well, for sure. So as always, you can find our content on Instagram. We post somewhat regularly on there, when time allows. Otherwise, we do have our episodes available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, with the video of our episodes posting to YouTube. But fellas, without any further ado, let's get the duck out of here.